When you're investing in someone, you also are, it's a piece, you've given a piece of who you are to them too, yes.
Buongiorno. You're listening to Going, Where God is at Work, a podcast that sits at the intersection of missions theory and practice. We're walking out our call to ministry in faraway places and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Jesse Pauli, a missions leader serving in Rome, and I'm here with Alessandro Di Leonardo, our church planner in Cisterna di Latina, and Jen Williamson, our missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. And this is our second take of this rough start we had this morning. We were laughing because, ironically, we did not pray this morning before we got started with our recording, and we started having all these technical issues. So Jen said, hey guys, we need to stop and we need to pray and restart. And so that's what we just did.
And the irony is we're on a mini-series on prayer.
Exactly. Well, yes, we want to continue our mini-series. We were just talking before we had to reset everything about how these mini-series have been so good, but just a reminder that, we're just scratching the surface. There's more things that we can talk about. When we do these, roughly 30 to 45-minute episodes, there's no way we can fully explore all the depths of the arguments and topics that we're talking about. But today, we'll continue our series on prayer by sharing an interview that Jen did with one of her prayer partners earlier this week. And after the interview, we'll come back to discuss together what we heard and our thoughts. But before we play that interview, let's talk about who's praying for us and who is on our prayer team.
Yeah, I think both David and I, the people that prayed fervently and first for us were our parents when we launched to the field. And obviously they had a very personal investment in us and were very related closely to us and cared deeply for us and our children. And so some of their motivation was more about the relationship with us, although they are believers and they did care about the mission and the ministry. But we have everyone from those very close relations to sort of this other end of the spectrum of people that we only met because we shared with them about our ministry in France. And I know hardly anything about their personal lives, and yet they receive our prayer letters, they respond to our prayer letters, and they're praying for us. And there our connection is this unity in Christ and one spirit and one mind about wanting to reach the world with the good news of Jesus Christ. And so we're united in that front. And I have people like that on my prayer team. And then sort of a little bit of everything in between.
Yeah, on my end, unfortunately, my parents, not being believers and not understanding missions, they're not there in the prayer team. But I came to Christ in college. And so it was through that ministry there that a lot of my prayer partners are the people that went to school with me, at least the ones who know the Lord. And then as we grew our network of people who support us, then churches started taking us on. And so we have people that actually we've never met that are praying for us. And it's so fun and interesting whenever we invite mission teams to come, and then you find out that some of those people are the ones who are really praying for you. I recall one time one of the people really just look at me in the eyes and say, me and my family pray for you all the time. And although in a way I know that people are praying for us, but when he said that, it really brought it to life, and that really touched and encouraged me to keep doing the work. And so, like you said, Jen, there's so many people, some we know, some we don't, some we are invested, some that we somehow maybe you spoke somewhere and they touched their hearts, and we'll never meet them again until we go to heaven. So those are the beautiful stories.
Oh, yeah. I like one of our teammates calls their supporters prayer and financial warriors. I like that imagery of the warrior. But for us, it's also a mix. I would say one of the interesting things was one of the first families that really started encouraging us in our walk towards becoming missionaries. It was their kids. It was so cool to see the parents. They had a heavy interest in evangelism, discipleship, and missions to some degree, but they would invite us over and we would go over to their house for dinner and stuff. And then their kids would pray and they'd encourage their kids to pray for us. And I remember one meal in particular where the son was sitting and he's like, Dad, what if instead of tithing 10% to the church, what if we like lived on 10% and tithed 90% to missions and in the church? And I just thought it was so cool to see the work that was happening in the hearts of these kids. But I would say as we've been here, some of my favorite, not favorite, but some of the interesting things has just been when people in conversation bring up your newsletters. It kind of to me is an indicator that they've been praying for you. They've been following along on the journey, and that's really encouraging to me. And so that's been all kinds of people. Sometimes it's staff of a supporting church that I've never met, but because the staff has regular prayer meetings, they know me and they know what's going on. And so, yeah, like you guys already have said, both of you, our prayer team is made up of everything from children to widows and all in between.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jen, why don't we go ahead and play the interview? Would you introduce your guest?
Sure. I had a great conversation with my friend, Donna Schweiger. She's a prayer partner who lives in Spokane, Washington. And Donna and her husband are heavily invested in supporting missionaries and extremely dedicated to the work of God all around the world. They're so invested that they've even visited us here in France several times. And they're the type of prayer partners that will reach out if they haven't heard from us. Like there started to be a mess up with our weekly MailChimp, and for some reason they weren't getting it. And she's one who will reach out and say, I'm not getting your weekly prayer letter. So I love that because that says to me that she is, like you were saying, Jesse, she notices and she's reading them and she's paying attention. So as you'll hear in the interview, Donna has a prophetic gift. So occasionally she'll respond to our weekly prayer email with just a word of encouragement from the Lord. So this is my interview with Donna. So hello, this is Jen Williamson with the Going Podcast, and I'm here with Donna Schweiger, who is one of our prayer partners. Donna receives our weekly email and updates and the I don't know how regular updates of many other missionaries, and she is committed to praying for those who are on the mission field. So Donna, welcome to the Going Podcast.
Welcome. Hello.
I'm so glad to have you here. And we are talking about prayer right now and the importance of prayer on the mission field, because we know that apart from God, we can do nothing. So while we're here to live out our calling on the field and to follow God into the places that He's called us, we also know that we need a mighty work of the Spirit, and we're completely dependent on God to be able to do what we do. And so that's why we're so excited to talk to some of those who are committed to praying for those in missions. And you are one who really is committed to that, who prays for many, many people who are on the field. So my first question for you, Donna, today is, how did God call you to pray for missionaries, or why do you have this burden to pray for missionaries?
You know, I think it's kind of a generational thing that God's planted, because I had a uncle who was a missionary to China, and I think that just kind of there's been an interest there, but not, just how you sort of have something that's there and then it starts to grow. So when we were first saved and we lived in down at WSU, every year they had a mission conference, and so we would go to that, and then we'd have them in our homes. And I think just that kind of started that interest in, missionaries and what they were doing and out on the field, and what a different, how different it was. And then when my daughter in her 20s was with YWAM. And so that was where really started to pray for them and support other YWAMs. And so that was kind of the beginning of our support. And then what I found was, as we supported more missionaries and they'd go out into these fields, that they were not always prepared for the spiritual warfare they were in. And I think that's really where our prayer needs to be, is the spiritual warfare that comes against, we all get it, but especially in mission fields when there's so much darkness, and the enemy doesn't want you there at all, and hasn't had and has had a foothold there for a long time. So I think that's really the thing, is just seeing how much they need that support, that hedge of protection around them, so that they can do their jobs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So right now we're in the midst of a 3-part series on prayer. And so we've already recorded what will be released this coming Tuesday is a podcast on sort of how we as missionaries pray and engage in prayer for ourselves and our ministries.
Mhm.
And we talked about prayer being 4 things that are kind of not what we imagine or what we expect prayer to be. We talked about prayer as being work. And I love my job. So work isn't a bad thing. God created humans for work, but it's not laying on the beach. Like work, prayer is work. We talked about prayer as being learned, that sometimes we can think, well, I'm a Christian, I should just know how to pray. But actually prayer takes practice. And we gain our skills and our understanding. And Jesus taught his disciples to pray, which means that it's something that we learn. We talked
Right.
about prayer as submission, that a lot of times I can come to God with a list of what I'd like him to do. But even Jesus in the garden said, not my will, but yours. And that prayer is a means of aligning our will and our desires with God's. But then we also talked about prayer as battle, which is what you've just underlined, that prayer, there are real forces at work against us, particularly on the mission field. There are strongholds that are in place. And we're so grateful for prayer warriors like you who are helping to back us up, because the battle is real and the enemy is real and the fight is real. And
Yes.
to get out there and to do what God's asking to do means we're facing genuine opposition. So I'm really grateful for warriors like you who are out there in the battle with us. Do you have any experience of prayer in those other arenas? Prayer as work, prayer as something that you've learned, or prayer as submission?
I think all 3 of those. Prayer is work, because sometimes, I kind of go through the rote prayers and, pray every day. And then sometimes it's like I need to really put things in place that remind me to pray. It's like, oh, I've got all these missionaries and prayed for them for a while. So, I really need to come back to that and work at making it a part of the rhythm of my life, not just when I think about it, but it's always there.
Right.
Because our family, of course, gets prayer all the time.
Yeah.
And people that we, are friends, but then the missionaries that we don't see all the time, to make sure that they are a part of that prayer rhythm that's ongoing. And even when you don't know what their needs are, God does.
Yeah.
And I think that's the learning part of prayer. Yeah. With me, it's been the learning part and seeing God's answers that continues. But also, I've had to unlearn. And this was really difficult because, a lot of my prayers were, God, I want this and I want that, and do it this way and that way. And I wasn't coming into his mind and what is it that he wants.
Which is the submission piece also, right?
It's a huge submissive piece. Yes. It's like, oh, it didn't go my way, so I'm upset. And how many Christians do we know like that?
Right.
Well, I prayed for healing and I didn't get it. So God, I'm done.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Jesus prayed for the cup to be removed from him in the garden, and God didn't take
right.
it, because God sees the bigger plan and God has a broader perspective, and we can trust that he is good. And whatever he's responding in our prayers is good and holy.
It is
and
good.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And we don't see the whole picture. I can look back and say, oh, that's what you were doing. That's why we walk through that. So a lot of it is history. But then when I came to that place, it was kind of like, well, how do I pray now? I've been telling you what to do for so many years. So it's listening to God, and I prayed the Lord's Prayer a lot more because he said that's how to pray. And I know I can't go wrong there.
Exactly.
Parts of it. What do they need today? The daily bread. What's their daily bread? What's the kingdom? What are they doing in the kingdom to bring it to earth? And those things that come against them, and where do they need forgiveness. So, all of those things are vital. So you can't go wrong when you pray the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah, they say
And,
it's the prayer
and
that never fails. Your will be
it is,
done, Lord.
yeah.
Yeah.
And isn't it amazing how we can take something like that and how the Lord just continues to open it up and learn more about it?
Yeah, right? I tie that often to, the part that says God's will is good, pleasing, and perfect. So
Hmm.
I can pray your will be done because I truly believe that God's will is
Yeah.
good, pleasing, and perfect. And that's what
Hmm.
I want. But and I hear you. I've prayed for healing in my own life and haven't received it in places. And you think, okay, I
Yeah,
have to
yeah, you
believe
are.
that what is happening in my life is good, pleasing, and perfect according to the will of God.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, do you have a process for how you pray for your missionaries, all the missionaries that you're supporting and that you're praying for? Do you have a day of the week or a place that you keep the list, or how do you go about praying for those on the mission field?
I am, what am I? I'm a random. I have
Mm-hmm.
this, I'm random. You
Yep.
can't follow me. I have some things that I do, but a
Right.
lot of things. So I don't necessarily, I get bored if I do
Yeah.
things. So
Yeah.
sometimes things get left out, but then I'll get a download. And lots of times, being more in the prophetic, the Lord will give me words for people.
For sure.
And so lots of times, when the Lord gives me a word, then I will share it with them.
Good.
This is what the Lord told me today, and this is how, and then when I get prayer, when you get newsletters and I pray over those. But unfortunately, I can't say I have a consistent, I just kind of say, Lord, unless he brings someone to mind, I'll just say, Lord, you know who we're supporting, each one. And I've just begun to pray scripture over them.
Oh, that's good.
Because, it says the word doesn't return void, and it's powerful.
Yeah,
So
it is.
I do more of that, like Psalm 91 is a good one. That's a good protective one.
Yeah.
And the one he's given me lately to pray is when in Acts, when the disciples, were filled with the Spirit and they went out and signed signs, miracles, and wonders, and prayed that over. And so it's more of kind of like, unless the Lord brings someone up individually, sometimes he'll wake me up in the middle of the night and I'll pray for people, but it's kind of a overall,
Yeah. I think that's great.
kind of a blanket prayer.
When Donna says she's a random, she's talking about sort of learning styles. We have concretes and randoms, and concretes tend to be more process oriented, and randoms tend to be more spontaneous and event oriented. And I think God uses both. And I love that because the random tends to be more open. And I bet, Donna, that you're sensitive to the Spirit. So when someone, in your realm is experiencing a need or some spiritual warfare or whatever, that's probably when God is waking you up and you're responsive to that. And that's also like a beautiful example of the submissiveness of prayer. What you're saying is, I'm not going to determine when I pray and who I pray for. I'm going to trust the Lord to bring to mind who to pray for and when, and I'm just going to be obedient in that moment. And I think that's a beautiful discipline in and of itself.
Yeah. Thank you for that encouragement, because sometimes it's like, I have, because I'm really not an intercessor. I have intercessor friends, and they can pray for hours.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I pray throughout the day, but I can't just pray those long,
Yeah.
sit down long enough to pray for a long period of time. Yeah. But those intercessors that God's called to do, they can pray all day. I mean, and it's not that I intercede, but that's not the gift I have.
Right. But I think God uses that just the same.
Yeah.
So what encourages you in your prayer ministry?
What encourages me is to see the results of what you pray for. You don't always see them right away, but as you pray and you live life long enough, you can see the results. Like my mother-in-law wasn't saved. Prayed for her when we were, in our 20s, from the time that we got married. We started praying for my mother-in-law, and she didn't get she didn't receive the Lord till she was 85. And so, that's just, a confirmation that, because you pray things once and you think, well, but to be persistent and to keep praying into those things. So that helps now when I see my grandchildren not walking with the Lord. You answered those prayers. I don't know what your timing is. You know them. I can give them to you, and I know you're going to answer those prayers. So, and sometimes they're answered right away.
I love that.
Yeah.
That kind of touches on my next question. I was going to ask you, do you ever get discouraged in prayer, and how does that impact you?
Yeah, I think that when I really saw that I was not praying, I know there was times when I did pray, but sometimes it's like, what did I miss when I didn't pray that way? But the Lord says, he takes our prayers and, the Holy Spirit makes them acceptable to the Lord. So I have to believe that that's true. But I think that was kind of a discouragement when I was like, I've been telling you what to do for a long time, and all of a sudden, and I don't know, when you really see your vulnerability and it's that humility and saying, who am I to tell you what to do? Why not just give it to you and let you do your will there?
Yeah.
So that was. But then I think with family, sometimes it is discouraging because, you want to see them all walking with the Lord. But I want to see it in my way. So I have to step back and say, oh, look what you're doing. Just, he gives us little pieces of you are working there. Yeah. So
I was meditating this morning on Psalm 27:13 and 14. And Psalm 27:14 is very well known. It says, wait on the Lord, take courage, be strong, take courage, and wait on the Lord. And I looked at it in the NET, which is the current version that I'm using. And it said, rely on the Lord. And I really loved that because waiting, I think it's a valid translation. But what is really undergirding that verse is that idea of trust. Like in the moments when we know that we're not seeing the end yet, we're seeing someone in process, whether it's our kids or someone we've been witnessing to for a long time here on the field, or a project that we're heavily invested in. We're seeing a moment where we're in a bit of chaos and disorder and things aren't completed yet. And we're in this waiting period. And that word rely this morning from the NET
that's good.
really ministered to me because it was like, you can trust that God is good. You can trust that he who began a good work will bring it to completion. You can trust in the character of the one who called you. And in the midst, when things seem disordered and we're in this wait period, rely on the Lord, be strong, take courage. And then it says it again, rely on the Lord.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Another thing is, because I'm more of the introvert, it's hard for me to share. And I definitely don't have the gift, that's not a strong gift is evangelism. And so, I kind of get discouraged when I was with that person and didn't share. But, I think encouragement comes from each other. Like you've said some things that have really encouraged me. But I was just heard someone who was a sermon that she said, I've known this lady for 10 years and, I meet with her all the time. I love her, but she's finally allowed me to share the gospel. And I thought, and she's a godly woman and she shares all over the place, but she also is relying on the Lord when it's the right time. And that was an encouragement to me that I don't have to go out and beat him with the word. I just need to love him and care for him. And the Lord knows the right time. And that was like, that just freed me up from a lot of things.
It's so
but that
true.
was that word from each other, God knows sometimes the word comes from the word, but lots of times it comes from something we read or from someone else that just, they don't know what they're saying. And I think that's why we need to be ready. And even though it seems like a funny thing to say, it's what they need to hear, and I pray at the healing rooms, the Lord will show us something and we'll just say it. And it's like, I don't know what that means. And they'll go, I know what that means. So
Right.
the Lord knows. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's again where your prophetic gift is coming in. I think you bring in a really important point there, Donna, because there are different gifts that are expressed through prayer. So you have said, I'm not an intercessor. And I resonate with that because I struggle a lot with intercessory prayer. But like you, I tend to have a prophetic gifting, which means that while I don't often know what to say to God or what to ask of God or how to intercede for people, I do tend to hear from God and have a sense of what he might want to speak into a situation, even if I don't understand it specifically. And I think that's healthy for us to recognize, because then we appreciate the whole body of Christ. We say, you know what, I can bring this piece, but I'm also dependent on others for these other pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are. We're made for community.
Yeah. And I think prayers is a community effort. This is why,
Yes.
like in our first episode, we talked about how as missionaries, we need to be praying. In fact, we have this kind of special gift in the sense that we could pray on work hours, right? I work 40 hours a week and I can spend some of those work hours in prayer. And everyone would say, that's a good use of your time, Jen.
Yes.
That's a healthy and reasonable use of your time. But somehow we can think, oh, but that's not, I need to be doing things, the praying. And yet we know in our hearts and in our spirits and by the truth of the gospel that actually that is the first and most important work I can be doing.
Right.
It's praying.
Well, and I think Jesus, how much time did Jesus spend praying? I mean, he would go and pray all night.
Yeah. He modeled it so well for us, right?
Yes.
But it's hard work. And that goes back to like our earlier conversation. We said it's work. I think I thought prayer would, I said in the previous podcast, I thought prayer would be like a cozy blanket. It's work. I love my work. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it's not laying on the beach.
Right.
Like it's work.
Yeah, when we're in prayer, we really are in a battle because we're praying things in, but there's things that have to go out before they can come in. So no, prayer is, I think the longer you walk and the more you see the power of it. When I went to Egypt and India, which there's a lot of spiritual warfare there. And, they encouraged us to get a team to pray. And I gathered some people together and then would send them, prayer requests. But it allowed doors to open and things to happen. And right away, the Lord showed me, because I had made these little bags to take to people, and I'd put little keys, a verse, you have the key to the kingdom, and then just a little cross. And when I went to Spokane and went through the scanner, he goes, this young man runs out and goes, what are all those little crosses in your bags? And it was like, well, I'm taking things, I'm going on a vision trip, and I'm taking them to the people in India. And then I thought, the Lord showed me that those were visible. And so I said, okay, Lord, I've got to get in India. So would you cover those things and they don't see them? When you've traveled enough, you know how many times you go through scanners. The worst one is the Paris airport. Oh my goodness.
Charles de Gaulle.
And they put everything through the scanner and take everything. And so nobody said anything after that. And I thought, thank you, Lord, you hid him.
Yeah.
We got into India. And so that was just a confirmation that I'm there, I'm covering you, and I'm going to send you into places. And you've been, you went on the mission field. When you went, that was brave.
It's been an adventure.
Yeah.
So that was a great story. It's funny how you keep kind of answering my questions right ahead of when I'm going to ask them. My next question was going to be, is there a story you would like to share about how your prayers have impacted a specific ministry or missionary or mission trip? So I love your scanner story. Do you have another story where maybe God woke you in the night, or when you heard a request and you just somehow knew how to pray for that?
Yeah. There's so many. One that the Lord brings to mind is name's James, and he's a head of the mission organization. He's Indian, and in India, and he's a head of his organization. But he came to visit. He said, I want to come visit you. So he came to visit. And the Lord had given me a word for him and for a lot of the missionaries. And so I said, the Lord gave me a word for you. And so I just shared it with him. He was so excited. And he said, I'm going to take a picture of that. And thanked me many times for that. And it was not anything that was huge, but it resonated with him. He was in a time when the Lord had showed him that he was going to be a missionary to the world. But he said, he was called me to India for a long time. That's the only place I've been. I said, that's a pretty big mission field.
Already, right? Yeah.
I mean, he is amazing. I'll share with you, when we get together what the Lord's doing there. But anyway, but now he is starting to, since he's partnered with Novo, he started to be used around the world. He just had a DBS training in Indonesia and Nepal, and so the Lord is taking him around the world. And so it's just, we don't know why the Lord does things. And sometimes, I see things, it's like, that's a pretty big thing for just me. But then the Lord will say, now's the time to release that. Oh. You know how that is, how the Lord puts something on your heart, and it might be a long time before you can share that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good insight.
Yeah.
So if you could speak to others who maybe know missionaries or are just beginning, like when you think back to your time in Pullman, when you're just starting to maybe welcome some missionaries or get acquainted with missionaries, what would you like to say to those who might have this call to being a missionary supporter or a missionary intercessor? What words of encouragement might you give, or even how would you help someone recognize that gift or that calling in themselves?
Yeah, it's, well, you probably know this better than I do, but to get people that are actually interested, they have their busy lives, and they don't really have a grasp of how important it is to go into all the world. But I would just say we're so blessed because of it. I said, we've gone a lot of places in the world, and we know we can visit people.
Yeah,
we
you visited me a few times, and I'm
I know.
grateful.
See, I know. Hope to see you again, too.
I do, too.
So, which reminds me, my grandson, who we took to Austria, he just got his Austrian citizenship.
Wow.
Because he has Jewish lineage, he could do that from Austria.
Wow.
So he may be visiting you.
Well, we would welcome him. Our new apartment
has... work and live in Austria, so
wow.
They're getting married and want to pay off some debts, and then they want to go. So anyway.
Wow. Yeah.
But that's an answer to prayer too, Bill, because Bill's not as interested in his heritage, which is huge.
Yeah.
And I think that just praying into that and seeing how it's beginning to come, not all the grandchildren, but some of them are starting to understand who they really are, what their heritage is. So, yeah.
That's so great. Is there anything else you would like to say about prayer or praying for specifically missionaries or those who are on the field?
I just think it's a wonderful journey, and to be a part of their lives, and to understand we're not all called to do that, but we all have a piece in it, whether it's giving, praying, whatever we have, even if you just take one person and that's who you support, and then, yeah.
Yeah. Well, David and I have for many years. We've been in France for 15 years now. Can you believe that? We've been so
I know.
grateful.
I remember our first conversation.
I do too, in the coffee shop. Oh my gosh. I will always
with your little boys
remember that. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also such an encouragement to be on this journey together, to know that there are those who have walked it with us, who are invested in it through prayer and through giving. It's interesting. This is a side note. This wasn't in my notes, but I remember someone once telling me as we were raising support and, They say you need your financial support team, but you also need a prayer team. And in David and our novice minds, we were thinking those might be two different groups of people. And someone said to me, actually, the people who pray for, who give to you are the ones who really pray for you because they're genuinely invested. And there's many who will say they pray for you, but because they're not having that monthly commitment or having that check come out of their accounts or for whatever reason, they don't actually turn out to be as invested in prayer. Where those who give, and David and I have experienced that too, because David has started flying and we have sort of a bivocational approach now. We're able to support missionaries as well. And we find that we are really invested in prayer in those that we're financially supporting. Do you see that as a link?
Yes. Because when you're investing in someone, you also are, it's a piece, you've given a piece of who you are to them too. Yes. And I think that's really, it's really, in fact, I see givers as really your prayer team. And
that's what it's turned out for us.
That.
For
100%. And how missionaries don't always, they don't, well, some of them do, most of them do, but there's some that don't really see their, I need the money to do what I do, but they don't necessarily see it's important that they see people that give also as their team. Yeah. We're all a team together. I can't go where you go, but I can give to you and I can, give you prayer. Because there's times when you're exhausted, and you're in a dark place and you don't know too many people that, I'm just thinking of you and David when you came and didn't know the language. Yeah. And, you also had children that were dealing with things. And so it was a tough place to be, I think.
So hard.
Yeah, it was. And you persevered.
I know that except for God's grace and, we speak often of the missionary couple that invested in our kids as teens. Without our prayer supporters, without those people that were also supporting our kids and we wouldn't still be here. We know that. We know that.
Yeah. And because you've been faithful, look where you are now, that the Lord, everything we do is preparation for something else.
Yeah. That's what David always says too, Donna. Yep.
I and it's like, if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here. Yeah. So I want you to meet my friend. In fact, I'm going to see if I can work it out when we do. Meet my friend Jackie. Do you know Jackie Maker?
I don't.
She doesn't know you either, but you would love her because her story.
Let's set it up.
Yeah. Just because she's amazing and she's got a heart for women, and what the Lord's done with her is absolutely amazing. So anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Donna, for being with us.
And, thank you for making this easy. It was like, I haven't done this before, but then when you said you're just doing sound bites, it's like, okay, you can just take the piece that is relevant.
We will.
All right. Well, we would like to take some time and just share some of the thoughts, some of the things that stood out to us about what Donna had to say and how her life has been impacted by praying for others, and also from you too, Jen. What was it like? I guess maybe let's start with that. What was it like for you to interview one of your prayer partners on prayer?
I was so surprised that she said she wasn't an intercessor. This shocked me because not only do I feel like she responds to our prayer letters and she prays for us, and even when she's been here and visiting us and we're walking around Lyon, she's one who will stop and pray and whatever. So I was surprised for her to say she wasn't an intercessor, which actually encouraged me because I wouldn't consider myself an intercessor either. But it made me realize that, I don't know, I guess, like there's spiritual gift of giving, and some people have the gift of giving, but we're all called to tithe. Or there's people who have the gift of evangelism and they have this special ability to share the gospel and win people for Christ. But all of us are called to be witnesses. And I feel like prayer is kind of like that. Some have this intercessory gift that's unique and they can pray for hours, and they have like disciplines of prayer that are something that I could not even imagine doing, but we're all called to pray. And I thought, wow, she just takes that super seriously. And that just encouraged me. But on the other side, I also saw how her way of praying for us was still really beneficial to us and an encouragement as a prophetic person. Yeah.
Yeah, that stood out to me too. The not an intercessor comment that she made, like that was something that I also took it as encouragement, because I feel like I pray often. And I pray for others and ask for prayer, but I wouldn't ever have labeled myself as an intercessor either. So now it made me want to explore that even more, finding intercessors amongst our supporters. I don't know if we have any that are or aren't, but
What stood out to me, it's a little bit what you said at the beginning, Jen, where who were your first prayer partners? Were your mom and dad? And you asked her that question to Donna, why did you start praying? And she said, really started with my daughter being involved in missions, and kind of realizing, if anybody's thinking like, how do I become a prayer partner, get involved first, because when you kind of get involved, invested, then it starts becoming real. And then of course the visits, getting to know the person, financially giving, all that stuff, like the more you invest, the more it starts becoming not a chore anymore, although we did talk about being work, but certainly realizing, hey, I'm part of what Jen is doing. I'm part of what Alessandra is doing. I'm part of what Jesse is doing. I have a prayer partner who's also financially giving, who really talks about, it's kind of funny. He kind of talks about like, I want to make sure that when we go to heaven, like I can say I had a part in that. Like he says it in such a genuine way. I'm like, wow, nobody thinks that. Like I've never met someone who thinks like you. So it's just crazy how he really feels invested, because he is in what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked that Donna said that we can't all go, and they have a special gift where they are and how they work and what they do, that yeah, they are not called to go, but they still have this genuine call and interest to see the gospel go out and be shared. And this is her way of participating in that. And I love that. And that's available to everyone.
yeah. I think the flip side of that is for people are, like you were saying, people seeking to be prayer partners, like exposure, but also I think for those missionaries listening, give people the opportunity to pray for you. Ask people to join you, to pray for you, to connect in that way. One of the things I've found is that whole idea of like seeing results of prayer that she talked about. Like you actually have to give, you have to pray prayers that are specific, so that you can see if you just pray generic prayer, like it's very hard to recognize if it's answered or not answered. But when it's a specific prayer, and so I thought the thing that she shared at the beginning about being encouraged by seeing the results of prayers and answered, I thought that also requires the missionaries to be sharing openly and clearly things to be praying for that can be measured, I guess, in some sort of way. I didn't want to use the word measured, but I guess in some ways we are measuring the results of those prayers.
Yeah, and to add to that, Jesse, I think it's important then to have to the missionaries. Of course, prayer partners can do that, and I love when they do that. To have a follow up. How many times we ask for prayer, and then it just goes into Neverland? Like people are praying, "Hey, how's this thing that you didn't write it again in the next newsletter? We've been praying about it." I'm like, "Oh yeah," and so we definitely have a responsibility to be specific, but also then to due diligence and giving glory to God, but also to have our prayer partners celebrate with us when God does answer.
That's such a good point. We have people that we've been praying for, for sometimes years in France, and in our very, we send it to like 30 people who get our weekly prayer letter, and we don't change names because I don't have the energy for that. We just tell them, keep this confidential. I don't do first and last names, but I have people who have been praying for so-and-so by name for 2 years. And whenever I see them, they want to know, how is this person doing? Where is this person in their faith walk? Or like one person, his wife committed suicide when it was postpartum depression thing. Their baby was like 6 weeks old. It was a major tragedy, and people are praying for him and that baby by name, and they want to know, which is just so amazing to me, how these people who live on the other side of the globe are so united with what God is doing and the work here through the people that we're connected with.
What I also found fascinating, probably because I'm the same, I've never heard of those two two different ways of I guess categorizing. You have to help me out with this, Jen. Is random and what's the other one?
Oh, concrete and random. So
Okay, concrete and random.
I should say that Donna was a teacher, and those are there's learning styles. You're either categorized as concrete or random, and then you're categorized as
abstract
and
sequential.
or sequential. Yeah, exactly.
So you're a combination of those.
Combination of those four. Yeah, you're either abstract or concrete, or you're either random or sequential. And so she's random, meaning she doesn't think of things in what we would think of as a sequenced order. It's more network connections in her brain. Yeah.
This is news to me, but I'm definitely random.
You are.
And so that helped me a lot to say, oh yeah, when I pray, I'm so random. And I appreciate to hear that from someone else, to someone that we're obviously interviewing, because you interviewed because you value her as a great prayer partner in all aspects. And so to say, oh, a random person can be a good prayer partner.
Yeah, 100%. Sometimes better. My husband's random and I am sequential. And sometimes, like, the way David's mind works makes connections that I wouldn't make. And I love it. It's a beautiful thing. And both can be valuable. I mean, it's not right or wrong, right? They're just, again, differences.
Yeah. I'm big into this. Like we were exposed to that during our training, pre-field training, the mind styles. But I've never thought about it as prayer. So now I have a new thing. I need to look in and think too. I'm a concrete random. My wife is concrete sequential. But yeah, it would be interesting to look at and think of our prayer life. I've never thought of that. That was good.
Was interesting.
Yeah, one of the other things I thought was really good to hear was just that the conversation you guys had around the idea of like recognizing that prayer works. And she talked about the idea that like you were saying, like you think of different people in different cycles, like randomly you would think of them. But I think that was wrapped around that also the idea of prayer working, despite knowing the specifics, despite being in a certain discipline. And I think that was an important piece for me, besides, that idea that prayer works, even when it's random, when it's vague.
Yeah. The thing that also caught my eye was the prophetic words. That's awesome. Would love to get more prophetic words from my prayer partners. I don't think I ever have. I have when I've seen people, but never through like email or just letting me know that God said something that's really needed. But I also want to encourage others like who might not have a prophetic word that there's other things you can offer and give. I'm just reminded of a young lady who always writes back after I send a newsletter telling me she's praying for the very thing that I just sent, like she's just repeating what I said, but it's like, oh, that means she read it. And I mean, she's praying for those things. It's like, that's not a prophetic gift. She's just repeating, but that's so encouraging to us when we read that. Because sometimes we doesn't mean that people are not reading and not praying our newsletter and our prayer requests, but it's great to actually hear feedback that there's somebody else on the other side and saying, oh, we're praying for these things that you just actually asked. And so, it might not be a prophetic word. It could be something else.
Yeah, encouragement is super strong. I think we all need it, even just a word of encouragement. We encourage our prayer partners every week when we send our letter. Please let us know if there's ways we can pray for you. And that really also, I don't know, somehow encourages me when they'll send back a prayer request themselves that I can also follow up on. Yes,
I love that too, because they see it as collaboration instead of like, hey, you don't just get the prayers. I need prayers too. I love that. I absolutely love that.
Yes. Speaking of needing prayers, we need you all to be praying for us and for this podcast and for the development and the direction of where this podcast will go. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll have a website and an email list and a newsletter for the podcast. I don't know, where people can get updates and pray for what we're doing here. I hope tuning into today's episode was enjoyable and insightful for you. Know that your ministry is important, and we hope that you consider your time with us an investment in your work. So don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, share the podcast with your friends. And pray. Pray for Asandro, Jen, and myself as we seek to move this podcast forward and to continue to serve our brothers and sisters in the mission field through this. But until next time, keep going wherever Jesus leads you.